All right, so we're now recording, and I'm going to turn this over to Bill after I bring up the PowerPoint, and
Yep.
you can tell me when to switch slides.
All right, thanks. Hi, my name is Bill Welsh. I'm the Director of the Office for Disability Services. And today we're going to talk about web accessibility, its importance for all users, including those with disabilities. One thing I want to hopefully get through in this training today is that when we're talking about web accessibility, I want to kind of change the talk from just talking about people with disabilities getting onto the web and focus more on all users with all different abilities and how we can make the web more usable by everybody. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll get that point. What I want to do first is talk about some of the ways that we use technology in general, not only those with disabilities, but everyone. So first, if you want to think about yourselves and how you might spend your hours and days using technology maybe at work. You know, when you first will come into your office, what do you first do? Typically, I would turn on my computer, check my email. If I come home, I do the same thing, or I'm checking my phone throughout the day. So think about yourself. How do you use technology on a given day? How many of you use online billing to pay your bills? How many use banking online? I know that most people now have switched to smartphones and are checking their Facebook page, their Twitter, Yammer, whatever you're doing every day. And if you're playing music through Pandora or iHeartRadio, whatever it might be, think about how you use the technology that we have available to us every day. What if all that technology that you use was completely rendered unusable by you? What would you do? How would you feel? Who would you call, first of all, and then how would your life as you know it change? We've all become so accustomed to using technology, and could you handle that change? What would you do if you didn't have the ability to check a website? Or I know I would have been completely useless if I couldn't order my holiday presents by Amazon. I spent about probably 70 or 80% of my time ordering all of my gifts this year through Amazon. So what if you couldn't, because of your disability or because that website was completely rendered useless for you? What would you do? So think about those things as we go through our training today, and really just try to focus on usability, how you use the technology, how we can develop better workflows in our daily lives for creating more accessible and usable websites for everybody. So what I do every day is I work with students with disabilities here at the university, and I just wanted to show you some technology and some information on student use of technology in the classroom. And a recent study that was done showed that 38% of students surveyed said they couldn't go 10 minutes without switching on some sort of electronic device. And as a father of 3 kids, I can tell you that's the case. Most of our presents this year and gifts were technology-based for my kids. 98% of college students own a digital device. 3 of 4 students say they wouldn't be able to study without technology. 46% that said they would be more likely to read an assignment in a digital format. And then some other uses technology. 82% use technology to write papers. 81% use them for research. And nearly all the 3/4 of the students who own tablets would prefer them to traditional textbooks. I know that as a student also, we use a lot of textbooks electronically, and most of our students are now switching over to renting textbooks and rather than using the actual textbook itself. So technology has changed our life. Technology has changed how students use technology. And so as we think about that and we think about accessibility, what does that mean for somebody who maybe can't see as well as they could have, maybe hear as well as they used to. We have an aging population of people in this country, and all of them are using, or most of them are using technology as well. So how does that change the face of what we do and how we make things usable by everybody? And here's some information from the U.S. Department of Education. For most of us, technology makes it easier. For a person with a disability, it makes things possible. And accessibility and usability, in my mind, are both similar, very, very similar concepts, and it affects every user. So if you're having difficulty possibly without a disability, what does the user who uses various assistive technologies, how is it difficult for them? So I thought I'd bring up a video, YouTube video that I found that brings this point home. So I'm going to have Elizabeth connect for us. Some of you might have seen this already, but if you haven't, it's pretty interesting. Let's get our sound going.
Oh.
We have a very special guest, Dr. J.
Yeah, let's try this again.
A very good evening, everybody. Welcome to Larry King Live. This evening we have a very special guest, Dr. Jane Smith. Dr. Smith has a doctorate in education and is an accessibility advocate and expert. She chairs several accessibility-related advisory groups. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here.
You have been very active in pushing for implementing universal design elements in education. What is universal design?
Well, Larry, the term universal design is a concept that has emerged from the architectural field and is now being applied in other arenas such as instruction. Universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible, without the need for adaptation or specialized design.
So how is this concept applied in education?
Applied to education, and I quote one of the pioneers of this effort, Frank Bowe, who, in his book, Universal Design in Learning, or UDL, defines universal design as the preparation of curriculum, materials, and environments, so that they may be used appropriately and with ease by a wide variety of people. Many educators have embraced the concept of universal design because its application enhances instruction for all students. It changes the emphasis from special features for a few to good design for many.
I am seeing a growing number of lawsuits from disability groups against universities. What kind of laws are in place?
Yes, Larry, lawsuits are up. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act Amendments of 1998 standards define the minimum level of web accessibility for websites developed or used by the federal government. Although in many instances, the 508 standards and the Y guidelines are identical or very similar, in general, World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, Web Accessibility Initiative, Y standards represent a higher level of accessibility. Regardless of which standards institutions use, they still must meet any obligations they have under the Americans with Disabilities Act and other legislation to provide access to specific individuals with disabilities who wish to access their website. The Access Board standards cover the broad spectrum of electronic and information technology, including, but not limited to, web content.
Who benefits from universal design for learning?
Well, Larry, the short answer is everyone. That's why it is called universal design. For example, while closed captioning of videos is needed for the deaf, others who benefit are English as a second language. Students with learning styles that respond better to reading text information, students with moderate hearing impairment. It also helps students watch and understand foreign language films. Accessibility is the right thing to do. Accessibility is the smart thing to do, and accessibility is the legal thing to do.
That's certainly true. Thank you so much for your time with us.
Thank you, Larry. It's been great being here.
Okay. So basically, hopefully you have information on universal design. I think the video really shows
A
that.
very good evening, everybody.
that, rather than just designing websites for just a few, I think if we build web accessibility into our regular workflow when we design and implement web pages, it really makes things more usable by everyone rather than just by a few. And I think adopting some of the universal design concepts is really important for us as we move towards more accessible web pages and why accessibility might be so important. So creating accessible websites really makes sites more usable by everyone. So if you create a accessible website, you're more likely to create sites that have better loading times, navigation, better search engines. Creating inaccessible websites might create bad publicity, bad press for the university, means potential loss of revenue. Accessible websites are more compatible with emerging technologies such as mobile and handheld devices. Reduction in complaints and litigation can be very expensive. And it also shows that the university's commitment to diverse populations, not just people with disabilities, but all individuals. And if you're in research at the university or you do any kind of grant writing or accreditation of your programs, many grants are now asking, especially if it uses technology, whether the technology used in the grant is accessible. Does it meet 508 or W3C guidelines? And it might be required in your accreditation process in your next go-around. So the federal government is really kind of cracking down on making sure that when we create information and technology that we're also looking at accessibility as a form. And then universally designing sites and technology works better for everyone, so not just those with disabilities. At Penn State, we've had a web accessibility policy now for almost 10 years. It's gone through various iterations, and recently this past year, in August 1st, 2011, a new version of 8054, we now have 8069. 8069 basically is now its own policy on web accessibility rather than being embedded in 8054, which is our web standard policy. I think this shows that the university is much more committed possibly to the idea that web accessibility is so important to make its own policy. And what we're looking at now, instead of our past 8054 guidelines, we're Section 508 compliant. Section 508, for those of you who don't know, will eventually probably adopt the W3C WCAG 2.0 guidelines. And that's our current policy, 8069. We're looking at the Worldwide Consortium W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And our conformance level, there's three. There's conformance 1, 2, and 3. We're looking at level 2 in order for our policy and for compliance to this policy. The current policy, 8069, looks at pages that are less than 2 years old. They must comply. And older pages must be made accessible, but they're determined by an individual department or individual web developer. And then also, if you have a request for an accommodation, those legacy pages must be made accessible. If you want more information on the policy itself, you can go to Guru and type in 8069, and you'll find the complete policy. I thought I'd give you some general guidelines for creating accessible materials, and the guidelines that I'm going to talk to you about today are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or Worldwide Web Consortium, W3C, and they're based on 4 principles. The first principle is to look at information to make sure that it is perceivable, and that means that it's available to the senses, vision, hearing, primarily, but it could be other senses as well, either through the browser or through assistive technologies such as screen readers, screen enlargers, other technologies as well. You want to make sure that your websites are operable, meaning that users can interact with either a mouse, keyboard, or an assistive device. So make sure that you don't make your websites just operable by one way, but look at using various ways to operate your websites. And then look at whether or not your information is understandable. Is the content clear? And is it confusing, or is it clear to the reader? Avoid ambiguity of your websites. Use language that is usable by most people. And this is really important. I'll talk about it, but for those with cognitive disorders or possibly learning disabilities, to make sure that you're reaching the larger audience with your web content. And then make sure it's robust. Use a wide range of technologies that can access the content. The first category of individuals that I'd like to focus on, and I think because of what's happened at the university in the last year with the National Federation for the Blind complaint that we've agreed upon, I thought I'd focus first on users who are blind, and probably making websites accessible to those who are blind is probably the more difficult, and probably includes the most types of changes that you might need to make to your web content and your website. So I thought I'd focus on that population first. So there are some things with screen readers that make things a little bit more difficult for somebody who uses a screen reader. Two of the most popular screen readers are JAWS and WindowEyes. And for most of you who don't work with a disabled population, what I've noticed over the last 15 years or so is that fewer people who are blind are using Braille, more and more using technology such as screen readers. So it's even more important now to make things accessible, especially your websites, for those who use screen readers. Some of this information came from WebAIM. They did a survey of users who are blind. And an interesting fact here is December 2010, the survey showed that there was a significant decline in primary users of JAWS. So some of our blind users who used to always use JAWS are now switching to maybe some other screen readers. Some of them are actually switching to Macs and using VoiceOver. But typically, the larger percentage of people who are blind are still JAWS users. There are some people that are starting to use non-visual desktop access, or NVDA, and I find that most people who are using that are probably web developers trying to check their website. And so you can see that 19.8% of the respondents were using NVDA. Those who are beginners were less likely to use JAWS and WindowEyes, and possibly might be using other different technologies. And then this is probably the most important statistic from this survey. There was a 550% increase in mobile screen reader usage in less than 1 year. So more and more individuals who are blind are using probably most likely iPhones, because it's the most accessible format of technology, mobile technology that we have. Some are using Android, but the Android technology for accessibility is probably not as good as the iPhone. That's just my opinion, but probably the opinion of most blind users as well. So when you're designing websites and you're looking at blind users, a lot of blind users are using mobile technology on a daily basis. And then I thought what I'd do is give you some information on the web from YouTube to show you, just some basic information about a screen reader. It's a little bit easier for somebody to tell you about it than myself.
Hey, John, we'll talk.
Do you want to start that at 1:08?
Welcome to this edition of Tech Talk. Today we're here with John Russell, Assistant Technology Instructor at the Center for Visually Impaired. Today, John will talk about speech output software and screen reading solutions.
Can you start it at 1:08?
So, with that, we turn it over to John.
So today,
There we go.
prerequisites to learn how to use a screen reader are things like good keyboard skills. Because with a screen reader, keep in mind that the person that uses a screen reader is going to have a visual impairment that won't allow them to just glance down at a keyboard and quickly identify a key. And very often on the internet, if you're pressing a wrong key, chances are it's going to put you in a place that you don't want to be. And sometimes it's much more difficult to back out of it than it is to get into it. Also, the auditory processing, as I move through this, you're going to get a chance to hear what these sound like. And that's an acquired skill. It's very much like hearing someone from another country with a heavy accent. It takes some getting used to, but after a while hearing them speak, it can be very easy. You even forget that they have an accent. So the auditory processing and just getting used to that is definitely an acquired skill. Internet access with a screen reader is one of the most challenging things that I teach here at the Center for the Visually Impaired. A lot of layered skills that need to be involved with it. For example, familiarity with combo boxes, check boxes, radio buttons, all of those edit boxes. A person has to know what exactly those elements are on the internet. That saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, you can only imagine how complex the internet can become for a person using a screen reader. But in saying that, it is very doable. A lot of the websites are accessible, or a good part of them, and I have full confidence that the majority of the people who have the prerequisite skills and the motivation to learn this.
Okay, so that just kind of gives you an idea that somebody who teaches blind users how to use the web, what his opinion of screen readers, how they're used. What I also thought I'd do is kind of jump to pretty innovative technology. Those individuals who are blind use lots of different modes of getting their information. One of those is a refreshable Braille display. And refreshable Braille display is something that a blind user might use to connect to their internet, to read through their internet, to answer emails. If they are Braille users, this is typically the way that they might use the computer on a daily basis. And so I thought I'd show you some technology on a YouTube video of somebody using their iPhone, using a refreshable Braille display and actually interacting with the phone using the Braille display instead of having to actually use the phone itself.
Hi, I'm here to tell you about Braille Display and Apple iPhone 4 and how these two devices can work together. This is Braille Display, iPhone. So what I have right now is I've connected Braille Display via Bluetooth to the iPhone, and I will be driving the iPhone without ever touching the screen. How it works. Braille Display is a device that communicates the text on the screen, or in this case on the iPhone screen, via the alphabet known as Braille. Braille is the alphabet used by blind people that is composed of several dots, and these dots shape certain letters. Now, you don't need to be concerned about the letters and the dots at this point. All you guys want to see is how the dots actually move on the Braille display. You can see that the Braille display, the dots change to reflect the icon on the iPhone screen. Right now, I'm reading the word calculator, settings, and so on. Then I can perform different functions to click on those icons and navigate the screen. Okay, let's do a couple of things with the Braille display. So what you'll see me doing, I'm going to be pressing keys on the Braille display. All of the commands will be performed exclusively by using those keys. Again, I want to reiterate the fact that I'm not going to be touching the screen. For example, in this instance, if I wanted to go in my icons here, go to iPod, Home, Mail, Safari, I can feel with my fingers the words as they would appear. Let's switch to the next page. Next thing I want to do here is new as I navigate.
Okay, cool.
They're not.
White Lines by Stacy Clark.
Getting you set up with WordPress. All right, we're going to stop there. I just wanted to show you, how someone who is completely blind might actually go onto their iPhone using a Braille display. So when you're developing different technologies, just kind of keep this stuff in the back of your mind that everybody uses their technology very differently. Some blind users who use Braille will definitely be using a Braille display. Some who don't use Braille might be just accessing their information through a screen reader such as JAWS. So that just gives you a little bit of a taste of various people who are blind and what different technologies they might use. Then I thought I'd talk about some of the barriers for screen reader users, so those who exclusively use screen readers. Here are some of the things that are very confusing. And this comes from an article that I found. Actually, Christian Vitten Johansson put me onto this article. And it was based on a survey that they had done of people who were blind from the National Federation for the Blind. And the main thing that I think that screen reader users have barriers to is confusing web page layout, confusing pop-ups, tables that don't read linearly, because if you've never seen a screen reader use the internet, basically the screen reader reads from top to bottom, and it reads very linearly. So if you have lots of different things on your pages that create confusing page layouts, this is going to confuse the screen reader user immensely. The next is unlabeled web forms or poor form design. If you've ever tried to use a web page that is designed with poor forms, the person navigating through the web page who is using a screen reader just have absolutely no idea where they are, what's being read on the screen. They can't even navigate if you're through tabs. It's very difficult for someone who uses a screen reader. They have no idea what to do. The next is no description text for images. So a lot of pages will just have graphic, and it just becomes very confusing for the user if there are no descriptions of text, or if your all text just doesn't make sense regarding what the image is actually portraying. And then the last is misleading and useless link text. So links not working, there is no skip navigation on a page, whether or not you could find the link itself. These are all things that are the biggest barriers for those who use screen readers. And I thought I'd show you just a quick video on misleading and useless text and how that a screen reader user might find that. And I would say probably the biggest problem that I've seen that's very difficult is when people just put throughout their
People who
page.
use screen readers often tab through links. If you could not see the screen, would you know where click here or here would take you? Would you go?
Link here. Link, click here. Link here. Link graphic, brief phone finder. Blank. link, top area realtor, link, Detroit Lakes Resorts, lots, and cabin search, link, Detroit Lakes Times dash listing, link, http://www.fargomls.com, link, click here, link, available properties.
Without a skip navigation link, the screen reader will go through the navigation links.
Link, Belgium phone, link, Georgetown phone, link.
Without a skip navigation link, the screen reader will go through the navigation links before reaching the main content. In this case, that's a lot of links. Imagine if you had to read every one of these links every time you visited this page. Would you come back?
Graphic, phone, link, graphic, SRCHMLTBL.
Okay, so basically that gives you an idea of how annoying a page might be if it's not developed correctly with lots of links and link here, click there, click here. It really drives those users who I know that use screen readers every day, it drives them batty. Then I thought we'd switch from those who are blind to those individuals who use the web who are visually impaired, and some of the difficulties that they might have with going through different web pages. So typically those that are visually impaired would use a screen magnification program. Probably the ones that are used the most are Zoom Text by AI Squared or Magic, but there's lots of different screen magnification programs out there, and a lot of our students I see using lots of different programs. But common barriers for screen readers when you're developing a website is graphics that contain text become fuzzy when they're enlarged if they're not developed correctly. So on your screen, what you see there is text that is enlarged, with just the text enlarged versus text within a graphic enlarged. And you can see the one on the right, Helen is very clear because it was developed correctly, and Keller is very pixelated. And as you make that larger and larger, it becomes even more pixelated. And so the person who's visually impaired really will not be able to see that type of graphic. Sites with low contrast can be difficult to read, or bad color combinations such as blue inks on black backgrounds. I see this a lot on web pages, and it's really annoying even for me, with typically good vision, but those who are using Zoom Text or any other screen magnification, it gets very, very difficult for them to see. Use true text format rather than graphic format. Put text in true text format, and it's much easier for users to change their font and background colors. And then as a general rule, I would make everything configurable for the user who is visually impaired, but it goes beyond that. I think if you make your sites configurable so anybody can change the font, the graphics, the layout, not the layout, but how the page looks to them, it really makes sense for everybody, not just those who are visually impaired. And these, if you wanted more information on users who are visually impaired, you can go to WebAIM, or you can actually go to our accessibility.psu.edu, and we have a lot of information there as well. Switching disability categories, I wanted to show you a little bit about those individuals who have hearing impairments. And really the main thing in regards to accessibility for those individuals who have hearing impairments is providing some type of captioning or providing some way of those individuals to get the audible information. There are more than 28 million people in the United States who have hearing impairments, and transcripts and captions provide an effective solution for both audio and video content. So as you watch this video, I want you to think about, or look at, well, how is that information accessible to you? And if you couldn't see a video or you couldn't hear a video, what would you do? How would you get that information? Let's say you took a class or you were trying to look at something online. You know, how would it be accessible to you? So let's watch the video. So here you see a guy using American Sign Language. And if you don't know American Sign Language, do you really know what he's doing? So think about yourself if you're watching, if you were hearing impaired and you knew sign language and there was no captioning, there was no American Sign Language to tell you what was actually on that video, how would you get that information? He's pretty animated, he's really kind of rocking it. And, you know, if you don't know American Sign Language, you have no idea really what he's talking about. So now I'm going to ask Elizabeth to turn on the sound and the captioning. And there's the captioning.
Into the club in my taxi cab, everybody's looking at me now. Like, who's that chick that's rocking the kick? You gotta be from out of town. So hard with my girls not around me. It's definitely not a Nashville party.
Okay.
All I see is the letter.
So hopefully that gives you an idea of information that those who are hearing impaired might miss. Oftentimes they're silent about it. Other times they're pretty vocal about it as well. But, you know, I think as we develop videos and put information on the web, especially our marketing videos, we now have a captioning policy 8025 for all of our marketing videos to make sure that they're captioned. We're also working at the university on a procedure for how to make videos more accessible for hearing impaired and how to caption. And hopefully in the next year or so we'll have a really good system here at the university, similar to what Stanford uses as a central way of making videos accessible. And there's more training to come on that. Okay, some of the things the reasons for captioning that I thought would be important to bring up. Captioning isn't, to me, just for those who are hearing impaired. A lot of people use captioning. I know if I'm watching a video and it's a little bit difficult to hear, or there might be an accent on the person, you know, I would definitely turn my captioning on. Transcripts and captions provide effective solution for audio and video content. It's compliant with Section 508, but it also provides accessibility for English as a second language students. So you're reaching a much larger audience. There is also, just so you know, the 21st Century Communication and Video Accessibility Act, which has further expanded regulations for online media. So there are new regulations coming out that were not included in the Americans with Disabilities Act, and now the federal government is looking at how do we provide accessible information for those who are hearing impaired. There's a lot of research out there that shows that about 75 to 80% of individuals who aren't hearing impaired or who don't have a hearing disability are also using the captioning. So you're reaching a much larger audience. Captioning also allows you to have interactive navigation. You can jump from one point to another. It's also an easy way to create video searches and libraries of videos. So if you have the captioning, you can easily search through those videos much more easily. Interactive navigation also lets the user skim through transcripts and look at any words. It makes students, I know that who aren't hearing impaired, it makes them more easy or better able to study videos and movies that they might have in a course. Okay, let's switch to the next slide. Okay. I thought I'd talk about some other disability-specific issues and people with other disabilities, not just those who are blind or visually impaired. So the first I wanted to talk about is those with motor or mobility impairments. Not everyone can use a mouse to click on small links or operate dynamic elements effectively, possibly due to limited use of their arms and hands. So this might be somebody who's had an accident of some sort. It might be a stroke victim. It might be lots of different reasons for the inability to use your hands. It could be you have difficulty with rheumatoid arthritis. It might be lots of different things. So when we develop pages that are used just by the mouse without providing other ways of navigating through the website, we're really limiting the use for those individuals. The other area that I think is a little bit of a larger area that people don't think about are those individuals with cognitive disorders. And this might include individuals with learning disabilities, traumatic brain injury, autism, or attention deficit disorders. The largest population of students that we work with actually are in this category. And when developing websites and content more so than anything, avoid lengthy interactive processes, so things that are more intuitive are much better for individuals. And it's not just those with cognitive disorders, it's actually for everybody. Make sure that, when you put together a site that it's usable. Try it on lots of different people. Provide structure and organization to your documents. Utilize clear, unambiguous phrases. Avoid sarcasm or parody, metaphors. This is typically, for people that might not actually get that type of information through those means. And then provide information in multiple formats for enhanced understanding and different learning styles. We all have different learning styles, and providing information in more than one means or factor is really helpful to everybody. Okay, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk, I know a lot of people have heard about the National Federation for the Blind complaint that we had filed against us in November 2011. And basically the NFB was contending that a variety of technology and websites at Penn State were inaccessible to those who are blind at Penn State. In October of last year, 2011, the agreement to resolve the complaint, we agreed to resolve the complaint, and we have 3 years basically to make our websites accessible. And in order to do that, we have many different action plans in order to resolve the complaint. We have timelines that we have to meet. And I just noticed that actually should say November 2010, not 11. Sorry about that. And in order to meet the requirements of the agreement, but also, I think more generally, in order to meet our Policy 8069 and also to create more universally designed websites, the university has charged a committee, the Accessible Information and Technology Committee, and we're looking at various efforts on web accessibility, and we're going to coordinate our efforts on web accessibility, accessible technology, accessible information and materials, and then procurement practices, how we actually buy technology. And in the past, I know that we've tested some of our technology, but what we're looking to do is make a more concerted effort that when we buy technology at the university, we're actually looking at accessibility as part of our purchase policy. So those things have been worked on at the university, but we're actually going to be doing it in a more concerted effort. We're also looking to coordinate our efforts to comply with 8069 and develop strategic plans for implementation and reporting. The NFB resolution basically gives us timelines that the university has to meet in the next 3 years. If you want more information on what that actual resolution is, it's available on the web. I'm not going to actually go through that today. But basically, we're looking at coordination support university-wide, and the university has developed a group called the Web Liaison Group, and each university budget area was designated to provide a web liaison to our assistive technology committee, and their job is basically to communicate information back to the units, back to the departments, and then work with their units and departments on strategic plans to not only meet the NFB agreement, but also to meet compliance with the Policy 8069, Policy 8054, and other web policies that the university has. We're looking at modeling what we're doing here at Penn State on Cal State University. They had a similar issue with their state. Basically, they were not in compliance with Section 508, which was their state law. And in 2005, they came up with a 5-year plan that looked at meeting those guidelines. They've now taken that a lot further, and they were looking at web accessibility and accessible technology, as well as accessible instructional materials. Penn State, I think, is going to take it a couple steps further and look at procurement policies, as well as some other things, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So basically, the Accessible Information Technology Committee is to develop accessibility trainings and best practices for both faculty, staff, developers, instructional designers, as well as students. And we're looking to develop and maintain a coordinated effort on resources, tools, trainings, best practices. We're looking at identifying additional system-wide resources that might be required for this. And then we are going to assess current efforts at Penn State, make recommendations for enhancement and further coordination. And then we are developing and have been developing over the last year a series of practice groups that will be implemented to meet these goals. And let me tell you a little bit about some of those practice groups. The first one is the Web Accessibility and Instructional Media Training Practice Group. And basically, this group is responsible for a lot of the trainings we're doing on accessibility, such as what we're doing today and tomorrow and part of some of our other Winterfest trainings. We're also going to be developing trainings so that if you take a Word or PowerPoint or any of the Microsoft Office Suite products or Adobe products trainings, accessibility will be built into those trainings, so you don't have to necessarily go through separate trainings to get accessibility. And we're looking at creating calendars of training on web accessibility and other accessibility and technology issues in the next year. And if you want more information on those trainings, you can go to accessibility.psu.edu. There's a calendar and actually a nice new look for that website. And over the next year and a half, we're actually going to be adding to that website, looking at the navigation, making it a little bit easier for us to find information. So if you haven't gone to accessibility.psu.edu recently, you might like the changes that you'll see. There's a new look to it. There's better navigation. It's more of a dashboard type of look. So there's an event calendar, table of contents, there's a news blog. So check out accessibility.psu.edu, and over the next 6 months you'll see some pretty drastic changes of the site. And if you have any suggestions on how we can make it better, please let us know. So that's another practice group that's working on various things. There is a web accessibility review and implementation group, which I talked about. That's the web liaisons. We're also, one thing I mentioned when we talked about hearing impairments is a captioning practice group. And the captioning practice group is looking at a central system. So if you have a video that you'd like to have it captioned, what is the best way to do that? We're looking at site licenses with vendors, some university-wide pricing for the captioning. And then we're also looking at in-house solutions for captioning and how we can get that done at a much lower cost than what we're actually paying for captioning today. The other group that we're looking at is an assistive and adaptive technology group. What are we doing with assistive and adaptive technology at the university, in our computer labs, as well as various other places, and how can we improve that? We're looking at accessible instructional materials. How can we make materials that we use in our classrooms, whether that be online or resident instruction, how can we make those more accessible? And then we have a practice group on accessible online learning. So as instructional designers and faculty are putting together websites or courses online, how do we make those accessible for our students with disabilities, as well as for those without disabilities? And then the last group that we're looking at is procurement of accessible software and hardware. So when we go into the RFP process, are we looking at accessibility? Are we looking at whether the technology can be used with a screen reader? Can it be used with lots of different assistive tech and adaptive? So that'll be part of our process that we're looking at university-wide. And then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is, one of the questions I get asked most often is, how do I do this? Where do I start? What do I need to look at first? I have 1,000 web pages, and how do I make those web pages accessible? What is my plan, and how do I meet these guidelines? It can be very daunting and very overwhelming. And Christian Vinton Johansson came up with this triage method, and I wanted to share that with you because I think it's a good way of framing how to tackle this problem or issue. Probably the first thing that we would suggest that you do is audit your sites, look at how your websites are accessible. Are they accessible? We actually have an RFP out for a product right now that will be a university-wide validation system that will look at web accessibility. It will provide a report. It will not only provide the report, but tell you what it is that you need to do to remediate your sites and make them more accessible. Until that actually is implemented, probably within the next month or 2 months, we'll have a license for this web validator. You can go to lots of different places. Wave is a good tool to use. FAE is another tool that you can use to validate your sites. So once you've done that, the other thing you want to do is look at selecting your pages based upon web analytics. How often is your site hit? What type of users are using the site? Various things that you can look at regarding web analytics. And then test your pages using the validation, fix your problems, and then go back and start the process all over again. Eventually, I think what will happen is, as we build web accessibility into our regular workflow, as we develop sites, we're going to see that small changes that we make to our websites will actually create much better web accessibility for all users. They'll be more navigatable through new technologies, mobile technologies, and so as you create your sites to make them more accessible, you're going to actually see probably a big change in your user profile, and probably more people would use your sites it's actually, to me, I look at it as more of a marketing tool than anything else. So let me provide you some resources for today. Some of the things that I use to put this presentation together. WebAIM, I think, is a really great resource to look at not only different disability types, but also provide you with information on web accessibility and usability. If you want to, I'm not sure that I would necessarily suggest reading through all of the WCAG 2.0 or information from W3C unless you really want to go to sleep some night and you can't go to sleep. I'd open up that website and start reading. But we're going to provide you with, in the future, trainings on how to somewhat demystify the WCAG 2.0 guidelines, how to make them a little bit more user-friendly, and what types of things that you should do that really could create much better web accessibility as opposed to reading through all those guidelines. And then if you go to PSU Accessibility website, all of our information that we will be developing over the next year or so will be placed at accessibility.psu. You can also look at the W3C information on mobile web and WCAG, and W3C's mobile web best practices. Will give you a good head start on a lot of the web accessibility information. And then as I talk to you, a lot of our trainings, upcoming trainings, if you just go to accessibility.psu.edu, that will provide you with a good calendar of the trainings that we're going to provide over the next 6 months at least. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. Are there any questions? Are we taking questions?
Well, yeah, taking questions. Can do them over the phone or chat room.
I have a question. Where will we be able to find the transcript and the PowerPoint slides?
That is a good question, but we will make them available shortly and send information out probably somewhere on the accessibility website.
Yeah, we're going to post most of these trainings on accessibility.psu.edu. What we'll do, because we weren't able to get the transcripts working, we'll send out an email link for all of you to get to this recording if you want it with the caption.
Thank you.
Yeah. I see there was a question about the FAE. Is it free or not?
Yeah, FAE is a free tool. It's developed out of the University of Illinois, and currently it doesn't necessarily look at WCAG 2.0, but that version is coming. But it's a great mechanism for understanding where you might be with your web accessibility. What you're going to find when you use a lot of the web accessibility tools is one does something better than another, and to get a really good tool, you might have to use 5 or 6 different tools. What we're hoping with our software purchase, the university, is to find a tool, and the one that we're looking at is High Software's Compliance Sheriff, and that'll probably be our tool that we're using university-wide. It does some really great reporting. It will be free to university employees, so you can test your sites as often as you like. The other nice thing is it provides some great reporting tools because we're going to have to provide reports to the NFB, at least yearly. We're going to have to show that through the Office of Civil Rights that we've met the web accessibility guidelines, met the criteria of our NFB agreement.
When will that be available, do you think?
The RFP is out. When it's available will be probably within the next month.
And who will be able to access that?
Faculty and staff, anybody at the university that will.
So people can set up their own reports?
People can set up their own reports. They can you know, it'll be a university-wide hosting validation tool.
We were getting one more question in the chat room.
Okay, I am technical editor for a web course, so I'm interested in all this kind of information.
And
Will we be notified of this through the accessibility.psu website? Yes, absolutely, you will be.
and that has an RSS feed, and I believe you can set up email notifications for
Right.
anything posted there.
Yep, absolutely. You're welcome.
Thanks, people.
Thank you, everybody. Is there anything else? Any other burning questions out there?
Is there an estimated cost to the university for the project in total?
That I don't know. I think that I can't really answer that question. I think if everybody gets on board with understanding web accessibility, going through the trainings, and putting web accessibility as part of their workflow, it's probably not going to cost us as much as it might if we did get another complaint. I guess the best way I can say.
I think just from my experience, it's not going to be cheap to get ourselves up to speed, but in the long run, it will be cheaper than having to do everything at the last minute.
Right. Well, and I think what for me, you know, working with students with disabilities, we're so reactive now. You know, students course and they're not sure whether the content or the information is accessible to them, and then we have to spend a lot of time and money and energy trying to make the course accessible. Same thing with websites, and if we do it right away, I think we'll really be on the upswing of that.
I see people are leaving. We'll be on a few more minutes.
Yeah, if people have more questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
I think I'm gonna, do we want to stop the recording?
Sure.
We're gonna stop the recording. If anything critical, we'll post it. So thanks again. Oh, it would be cheaper than lawsuit, okay, yeah. Due to commenting that it's cheaper than the lawsuit to accessify.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you.